Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about two ideas, appropriation and allegory. They kind of relate to, they come from similar places, let me say that. And so they also present a certain period in art history, 1980 to 1995, or more specifically 1979 to 1994. In that time period, these two ideas became very important to the way that people spoke with and dealt with what was coming out of artists' studios at this time. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we go into that, I want to kind of collectively deal with something, or a few questions that have come up in private emails, and I've had some of these conversations in response to those private emails with you individually, but I think it makes a lot of sense to address this as a full class unit. Grading, how grading works. I understand that for a lot of you, you like to kind of keep tabs on where you are in the class, and a lot of you are looking at this, the total amount of points that you have right now, and it's stressing some of you out, and that's what I want to deal with right now. So don't look at the total amount of points. The total amount of points do not reflect where you are with regard to this course. You have to look at things assignment by assignment and judge your performance based on how you've done on those assignments. All of the quizzes that we have had thus far have been out of 4 points. I understand that there are some glitches in Blackboard's grading function. I haven't been able to work it out. I have gone in and constantly rearranged the total sum of these quizzes. One of them continues to pop back up at 20 points. I am telling you right now, the quiz is out of 4 points. That's it. If you got a 4 on it, you did perfectly. If you got a 3 on it, that means you got 1 question wrong. If Blackboard is saying that you got 4 out of 20, disregard Blackboard. It is a computer program and does not understand how I have structured my grade book, and it's also a glitch, like I just said. So basically, look at how you've performed in each individual assignment as a way to understand how you're doing in the class as a whole. I teach in the liberal arts. I do not teach mathematics, and even though it is very simple math to have, say, a quiz be out of 100, or like the midterm, take the midterm for instance, other professors will say that a midterm is out of 100 points, but it counts for 20% of your grade. Well, I'm just removing that math problem for all of us. The midterm was out of, I can't remember if it was 20 or 25 right now, I'm not looking at my notes, but it was out of a certain amount of points. It was not out of 100. So if you look on your syllabus, you will see what each of these assignments is worth, and if you achieve that number, that's how that number is going to translate at the end of the grade, at the end of the term. So each quiz is worth 4 points towards your final grade. And because of that, each quiz is only out of 4 points. I hope that clears things up. I understand that because the way I run this specifically the grading section of this course is different from other teachers, that it can be a little stressful, and I apologize for that. But I'm doing it actually to make us all a little bit, I'm doing it to just make it a little easier for everybody. And I hope that it's not too confusing. So, with that said, we're going to continue to move forward. So, appropriation and allegory. Now, in conversation during a previous lecture, I did bring up the term appropriation, and I want to talk about it a little bit more right now. So appropriation specifically in art practice, this definition comes from tate.org, which I'm citing right here, and as many of you know, but some of you might not know, when you cite a source, you give credit for the person or the place that it comes from. In this case, it comes from an arts organization and an art museum based in London called Tate. They have a great website, and this website has a dictionary where I pull a lot of my definitions because it's a nice standard platform. And in this case, they talk about appropriation as the use of borrowed elements in the creation of a new work. So in other words, what artists are doing is they're taking something, specifically in this generation, they're taking something out of other aspects of cultural production and putting it in their own work. Now, in a lot of cases, as we're going to see, they're kind of re-performing a certain aspect of the way the artist initially created the work. And so nobody did this necessarily, but take, for example, Marcel Duchamp's Fountain, right? We've talked about this a lot. So Fountain, as I described in earlier lectures, is Duchamp appropriating or borrowing an element from industrial design. And the urinal was designed for a very specific purpose. It was designed for a very specific marketplace, and Duchamp took it out of that marketplace, changed its purpose by taking it out of that marketplace, and therefore appropriated it into a new thing, and that's what we refer to as the Fountain from 1917. Now, in this generation, what artists are going to be drawn to is not necessarily just the taking of something from another marketplace or another cultural arena, as it were. They're interested in the way that the artist made that decision. And so if an artist during this generation was interested in appropriating from Duchamp, they would take a urinal and make the decision to turn it on its side. And so what they're appropriating is not just the thing, the object, and imbuing it with a different meaning. What they're doing is actually considering the artist's perspective at that moment, and then kind of channeling or positioning themselves as that artist making that decision, or in a lot of cases, making a different decision based on the practice of that artist. Now, this relies on two things. One, it relies on a very, very, very thorough understanding of art history and a very specific understanding of where these artists find themselves during this time period with regard to art history. In a lot of cases, they think that art history has led them astray. And because the canon of art history, the lessons that I've been teaching you, have largely privileged the lives and histories of men, male artists, specifically European male artists, so white guys, that history does not fully convey the scope of what we've actually been encountering and what we've been living through. And so that history is effectively not the history of those artists. So like David Hammons, whose work I showed you, his body press print, Power of the Spade, Power to the Spade. That work is Hammond's way of engaging with a conversation that, this one history is all about white dudes. So what happens when I put my black body into the work? How does that change it? It creates another story. And so the subsequent generation, the generation we're going to be talking about today, they're after that conversation. So this tower of information that rests, that like maintains the canon. And I think I talked about this metaphor before, but if not, I'm sorry, it's kind of abstract. So this monolithic history that they're given is already falling apart. It's already dead and gone, pretty much. And so these artists are trying to find new ways of presenting these objects that they see and that they like, and reinterpreting them from their own perspective. What does it mean when a female artist photographs the same image of a very famous male artist's work? How does that relate? What does it mean when a male and female artist present almost identical portraits of each other in one work of art? These are works that we're going to be talking about in just a moment. And so that's where appropriation is coming from. Oh, so I said it was resting on two things. So one is art history. The other is a level of theoretical understanding. The generation that we talked about last week was some of the first artists that went back to graduate school after their undergraduate, right? And so it's the rise of what are known as the Masters of Fine Arts degrees, or the MFA. And what MFA programs teach you, so when you go to art school and you get a bachelor's in fine art, a BFA, what they teach you is how to make things. They teach you you take sculpture classes that teach you how to build, how to weld, how to pour, cast, how to carve, how to sculpt. When you take a photography class, they teach you kind of the brass tacks of what you're going to be dealing with, or what painting. You learn how to paint, you learn how to stretch a canvas. When you get to the master's level, you learn a lot more theory. And so instead of artwork being expressive in the way that it was in the 1930s and 1940s, it becomes very thoughtful. Now, last week I did mention that we're coming out of this era of Duchamp, where his legacy presents itself as kind of paramount to a lot of new artists and the ways that they engage with art practice. Sorry, car alarms. So that's one tiny detail. What actually is happening much more in a much more widespread fashion is that artists are going back to school and they're learning philosophy, aesthetic theory, marketing theory, Marxist theory or capitalist theory, and so they're approaching making artwork from a very different standpoint. It's not just about the making of a thing. It's not just about a simple thought. It's about a complex thought, or a series of a line of thinking that ends in an art object. That line of thinking, or that conversation, is often referred to as discourse because it's conversant in that it's written down and people read these texts and they pass them around and they have these conversations. And so this artwork is the rise of what is referred to as discursive art. Now, that's not a period style, or if it is, we're still in that period style, but it's just a change in the way that people engage with things. And so, appropriation, they have to understand our history, but they are also coming at it from a theoretical side. And so that's a very important shift. And it's one that too many art historians forget in the telling of this story, that these artists are actually much more thinking artists and much less, the practical stuff is still there. They're still making these wonderfully well-crafted objects. But if you asked them what they were making it for or why they were making it, they would give you a commentary that isn't about, well, that's me and I'm in my studio and I'm dripping paint. They're saying, well, the history of photography is littered with male artists that view females as only something that can be photographed, and so I am taking a photograph of a male photographer's photograph in order to say that I am taking control there. So there's this line, this discourse that backs up the way the artworks actually look and how they function. Now, in their understanding of history, they begin to critique it. Basically when you get a higher level of understanding, what often happens is you become a little bit of, you're a learned person, as it were, and so you're able to comment much more readily on the matter, and so you become you're critiquing it, and so a lot of these people that we're going to be looking at are presenting artworks as though they are cultural critiques. Now, the artist might not say that. I'm saying that because that's how I think these objects function, and that's how I think they function differently than what we've seen in the previous slideshows. So, what we have here are 3 different ways that artists engage with the idea of history. Because remember what I said. So this like central white dude telling of art history has broken down, and so artists begin to use or appropriate different things from that history as a way of saying where they are at that moment. So all of this stuff is going to be fleshed out obviously when we look through these pictures, so just bear with me and jot down some of these notes. So authoritative practice, the idea of of taking ownership of an idea and presenting it as such. An author writes something. He has an idea, or she has an idea. They have an idea is actually the better way to say that. They have an idea. They pen it and they present it. And it, like a doctor or an athlete, it is considered practice. Allegorical symbols. An allegory is when an image takes on a variety of different meanings, but that meaning is understood generally in some wider audience. So it's presenting, it's kind of like a little bit like a metaphor. So you present an image, and that image is a stand-in or a symbol, as I say, allegorical symbol, it's a stand-in for a much larger conversation, or it's a stand-in for a much larger discourse. And then the idea, of course, of personal narratives. There's no way that you can define, that an artist can define their present without actually engaging with who they are and where they're coming from. Now, all of these things come out of and are very indebted to the lecture that happened, not last week, 2 weeks ago, when we were dealing with artwork basically around the Cultural Revolution of the late 1960s and early 1970s. This was a time period where there was a lot of systematic changes in the culture of the Western world, and the world at large, but our course deals very specifically, or most specifically, with the Western world. And so it's important that personal narratives play a role here. And so really quickly, as I said before, we're talking about 1979 to 1994. And every year I'm surprised that there are students that are not yet born in our chronologies. So there's probably one of you that's listening to this lecture, maybe more than one of you that wasn't born in 1994. Yeah. Huh. Now lean in here and read a little bit, a few of these things. This is a female artist, and this is one of her first projects as a young artist. She's not referring to herself as a printmaker. She's not referring to herself as a sculptor. She's not a sculptor. She's not referring to herself as anything. She's doing what Caprow advised artists to do, which was present yourself as an artist. And so she is here presenting herself in this series of statements. Now the thing about artwork that is discursive is that it often is not concerned with the way that it's concerned with the way that these things look insofar as they present the information. This is a list of sentences that Jenny Holzer wrote. She typed them on a sheet of paper, and then she, using wheat paste, put these throughout New York City. So if you were strolling down an avenue in New York City in 1979 or late 1978, you might come across one of these things. And it might stop you in your tracks to just read what's being posted, because she is, if we're talking about appropriation, she's appropriating the public space. This doesn't exist in an art gallery. She is, like a lot of, at this time there is graffiti art that is bubbling up. It's not quite necessarily super pronounced, but it is a counterculture that exists in New York City, and it's one that Jenny Holzer is aware of. And it's not as widespread as what I mean. So it exists, it has existed since the early 1970s. And actually eons before that, but graffiti as we know it. Anyway, so what graffiti artists do is they appropriate public space and they put a statement, usually their name, on it. In New York in the 1970s, at this point, they are really into tagging trains. People aren't really interested in tagging buildings because a train moves. And a train means that name, like if you put your name, say Lightning or whatever your name is, on a train, that train's going to go all over the city, and people are all over the city are going to know that you tagged that train, that you snuck into that train yard and you did that. And it was political, right? Graffiti is always defended as a political art. Well, Holzer's project here was also political. But instead of appropriating something that was mobile, she herself was mobile. And she went through the space of New York City, the public spaces of New York City, and took like 8.5 by 11 squares of public space unto herself. Now, of course, people immediately said that this was vandalism. Some of these were removed. This is where the idea or the impetus or interest in the spray painting something like post-no bills, this would be one of those things. So anyway, as you read through these things, it is heroic to try to stop time. You get the face you deserve. Abstraction is a type of decadence. Fathers often use too much force. Learn to trust your own eyes. Repetition is the best way to learn things. So she starts off this list with the only way to be pure is to stay by yourself. And she ends it with repetition is the best way to learn things. She went around and put these things repeatedly through the city, and she did it by herself. It's very important that she is making that reference. She is identifying herself as a person in space in the same way that she is kind of siding with the passerby and saying that they are going to stop and read that first sentence, and then they are probably going to skip down and read that last sentence. They might not read any of the long ones. I certainly didn't read any of them aloud to you right now, but she knows that they're going to hit the top and at least the bottom. And so those are the two that convey a much more personalized perspective on the world. These are her opinions of the shape of public space. All right, now, here it is. This is, when you're teaching appropriation, you always teach Sherry Levine, and she's the photographer whose image is on the right-hand side of your screen. Walker Evans, I showed you this picture earlier in the semester. Allie Mae Burrow on the left. Look at the way that Levine has titled this work, After Walker Evans. Now, art historically, what that means is when you go through a museum and there's a work of art that says after so-and-so, it means that they're looking at that person and they're thinking very highly of them, and they want to present a work that's kind of in conversation with them. Or it's oftentimes done kind of in homage. In this case, Levine is really interested, as I was saying earlier, in the way that male photographers are given agency to photograph female sitters. Now, obviously, this is a very specific thing that she is dealing with, because as in the same lecture that I showed you I showed you Dorothea Lange's image where she photographed also a female sitter, and she did so with an incredible amount of staging techniques. Walker Evans was a little bit more blunt in his photographs. He was there photographing migrant workers in South Carolina, and was like, "Miss Burrow, please stand against this wall. I would like to take your picture." And he took a picture. Levine sees this picture and she's like, "Man, this picture is all about the way that dudes look at ladies." And so she goes a step back and says, "You know what, Mr. Evans, if you're standing there and you're looking at that lady, then I'm standing right behind you, looking at you, looking at that lady." And she took a photograph of it and presented it as her own work. But she obviously couldn't take a picture of Walker Evans photographing Walker Evans. Instead, she relies on this discourse surrounding photography and the dude behind the lens snapping the picture. Oftentimes, the dude behind the lens snapping pictures. And so, again, there's this reliance on a discourse that's the substructure or the subtext of these images. Robert Longo, Men Trapped in Ice from 1979. These are charcoal drawings. They are near to life size, so these are very, very large. And what Longo has done is he's appropriated a few different things. One, the actions of dancing, which I think he's looking at. He's not necessarily drawing people dance, but he's looking at people dance. Specifically in the kind of music, dancing to the kind of music that was popular in New York at this time, which was called no wave, which he was into. So that's one. Two, the style of dress is also pretty common with the people who follow these no wave bands, and they were going to clubs that were listening to, I can't remember any of the band's names off the top of my head, and excuse me, but what he's actually, the imagery that he's appropriating are from films from the 1950s, and all three of these show men that are acting as though they have just been shot. And so he is taking these stills from a film, pulling them out, and then making a much, much larger format drawing, hand drawing. At this point, he was doing it all by himself, but he now has a bunch of studio assistants. And so he makes these large drawings and presents them as such. Cindy Sherman, Untitled Double Portrait. So, excuse me, Cindy Sherman is the sitter on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side is a male artist that she's very close with. Not like lover close with, but she's just buds with him. And so in this picture, these two sitters obviously look very much alike, right? And so they're dressed identically, they are wearing similar clothing. There are these strange markings in this reproduction on the male portrait of things, but that's not part of the photograph, that's just some weird digital glitch in these images. So this is obviously a conversation about gender, right? So here are these two images that present the same, what could be read as the same person, But with enough cues in facial structure, the size of the hand, I think there's a little bit of just general body size. The male's shoulders are a little larger. His body fills the frame a little more than Cindy's does. And so it's recognizable that you're looking at a man and that you're looking at a woman, and then you immediately see that. But then the next thing you see is that they're dressed the same. And so you don't quite understand why they're dressed the same, and you look and you see the title, which is untitled, and someone else probably applied the double portrait. Cindy Sherman left all of her works untitled, but then referred to them as a specific thing. And so, voila, this image that confronts gender normality and brings up a lot of really interesting questions about identity. 2 weeks ago I talked to you about Genesis Peorage, and I think that where Genesis was kind of left to be in the counterculture because of the way that it was a single person confronting gender identity, specifically at that time period. Sherman and Richard Prince is the photographer who's sitting on the left. They're much more welcomed into the stable of artists, and I mean, Cindy Sherman just had this massive show at MoMA. She's alive and well and sells work for lots of money. Genesis Peorage, who I would say kind of started this conversation a little earlier, is now beginning to make a little bit of a name for themselves and present work in more esteemed situations. Thankfully, they're having a little bit of a resurgence right now, and they're still alive. Both of everybody that I'm talking about: Richard Prince, Cindy Sherman, Genesis. Now, when dealing with painting, allegory is a little bit more explicit, and so here we have a painting by Julian Schnabel, St. Francis in Ecstasy from 1980. Now, this image, now I hope that what you can see or what you're looking at right now and what you're deducing by looking at this object is that it is broken into two parts. There is a lower register. That's the word you use when anything is really broken into a series of stripes or horizontal bands. So the lower register of this painting is the one that has broken plates affixed to probably a board of some sort. I don't know what kind of board, but it's certainly not affixed to canvas. These things are really, really heavy and really massive. And then the top portion, the top register, is a stretched canvas, and it actually kind of bumps out a little bit towards the viewer and comes at us a little bit more. I'm not going to talk about the reasons why he decided to have that distinction, but what I want to talk about is the lower register versus the upper register. So, St. Francis in Ecstasy is obviously a biblical story. He's a saint. Here, what we have is this lower register that is marred with broken plates, as I just said, and so excuse me, lost my train of thought there for just 1 second. So what happens in St. Francis, in the story of St. Francis, is this moment when St. Francis of Assisi is in a sense of religious ecstasy, and he receives the stigmata. And for those of you who do not know what the term stigmata means, stigmata is a religious or a phenomenon that is often noted in Christian texts where devout believers are afflicted with the wounds of Christ. And so what that means, if somebody has the stigmata, it means that their flesh it shows signs of crucifixion. So you basically have these kind of sores or actual scars that appear on your wrists, because that's actually where people were crucified. They were not crucified through their hands. They're crucified through their wrists and also through their feet. And the story of St. Francis is that he was, in conversation with a higher being, his God, and these marks of the stigmata appeared on his body. And it's referred to as the ecstasy of St. Francis because he was in a kind of religious ecstasy, and all of a sudden these marks appeared, and he was that much closer to the experiences of Christ, and therefore that much more understanding of the plight of Christ as a Christian person. And so, but this is not something, it's agonizing for certain because you have wounds on your body. It's painful. Any historical account of the stigmata is painful. And I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but bear with me because it is structurally built into this painting. So, St. Francis gets these marks. In having these marks, he achieves a certain level of clarity, religious clarity. His questions about God, his questions about his faith in God or his faith in his religion are washed away with the presentation of these marks, and he is therefore more devout. And so in the lower register, what we have is this very scarring surface. It's one that if you get too near to it, you could actually cut yourself on. And on the right-hand side of it, there's a skull. And generally when you see a skull in a painting, it means it is a symbol of death, and therefore a symbol of our time on this planet. So for those of you who are familiar with Shakespeare's Hamlet, there's this moment when a gravedigger pulls up, or Hamlet, he's digging a grave. He pulls up a skull and recognizes the skull, and it becomes this conversation of what is known as a memento mori, or a momentum of death, therefore a momentum of life. And so that lower register is meant to symbolize a life on the planet, a life that is fleeting, and a life that is only part of a larger spiritual life if you are subscribing to the faith systems that give us the story of St. Francis in ecstasy, right? That top register, however, with its very kind of standard format, stretched canvas, it looks like a painting, operates like a painting, it is a painting kind of thing. What that is this clarity that St. Francis achieves. So in this ecstasy, in the scarring of his body, and you can see the shape of a body that has been, the hands, legs, and head have been removed. There are also scars on the body, floats between these two registers, as does this central figure of St. Francis. And so what Schnabel is doing here, and when you deal with allegorical paintings, this is actually how long you have to talk about them, which is the fun of art history. What Schnabel is doing is he is presenting a new form of a religious story that's been painted for a very, very long time. There is a very famous rendering of this painting that hangs in New York City. Julian Schnabel is a New Yorker. He still is a New Yorker. You see him around all the time. And it's by a guy named Giovanni Bellini. It was made in the 15th century. Schnabel would have seen that. Schnabel would have been drawn to the story. He would have been drawn to this kind of allegory and these heroic tales, because even though his paintings don't look like Jackson Pollock, he is trying very hard to identify with that heroism of American painting in its heyday. And he and this team of painters I'm going to be talking about are kind of like representing a different kind of painting history after painting went through some rocky patches. With the rise of artwork that was about the body and that was about the mind, painting kind of fell by the wayside. And so when you bring painting back, it's important to bring it back with a sense of its own history. And I've talked a lot about not that many slides, so we're going to start going a little faster now. Eric Fischel, The Old Man's Boat and the Old Man's Dog. I'm going to talk really quickly about these images. What I would like for you to do, or suggest that you do, is as I want to raise this. There's the whole painting. Listen to what I say, pause the lecture, look at the work, then move forward. That's my volley towards you, to you. So, because if we were in a class, I'd just be like buzzing through these things, and then you'd be left to your own devices to study them before the final exam. Anyway, The Old Man's Boat and the Old Man's Dog, 1981. There's a lot of things that are happening here. Immediately you see a lot of naked bodies. You see this kind of weird presentation of a female figure that takes the center of the frame, and then this dog that seems to be kind of taking what we know of as the kind of humping dog thing, which we read as a sexual thing, but also implies a power structure. And you have this guy who's sitting here seemingly drinking a beer, kind of casually on the side of a boat, rocky waters, female figure in the center, female figure of a much younger age and a much slighter body sitting on the left-hand side of the frame. And then these two figures that are moving from the dude drinking the beer to the left-hand side of the painting. And both of them bear the same tan lines. One of them is smaller, and then the one in the center is a little smaller, and then as it gets to the edge of the painting, the body is increased in size. What Eric Fischel is saying here is he's telling a story of, he's kind of imagining a young boy, or rather a young man, not a young boy, that'd be weird, a young man who feels compelled to show off how much of a man he is. And so he's assuming certain roles that he has seen his father play out, in the same way that a lot of people think a humping dog is humping because he has seen humans hump or something weird like that. Anyway, whatever. So we have this story of there's this kid, maybe like a 17-year-old guy who wants to impress this girl, and so he takes her out on his dad's boat, right? And it's like emotionally rocky. It's kind of an awkward exchange because it's a first sexual encounter, and so you have this figure that goes from diminutive and small and very childlike into one that is a little bit more pronounced and much more masculine, but it's all kind of crawling away from dude drinking a beer and toward the younger woman that he is sexualizing. There. Fast. Barbara Kruger, Untitled, Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face, from 1981. Kruger, like a lot of other artists interested in political discourse, decided that she would engage with a history of collage. And so these are artworks that begin as collage in the manner of old school graphic design. They would subsequently be photographed and then reproduced as a solid object, a photo montage, as it were. And all of Kruger's photo montages are presenting a discourse around the female body and the way that feminism has grown out of this pronouncement of the feminine. The idea of burning a bra is, you're burning this structure that withholds your femininity and allowing your femininity, your breasts, to be much more present and active and natural. That was feminism in the 1970s. In the 1980s, it's much more politicized. It's angry for a lot of good reasons, as are a lot of other identity politics stuff. And so all of her collages have this sense of them, and they all have this kind of look too. All right, so we talked about Jenny Holzer appropriating public space. We also talked about graffiti. Well, Keith Haring in 1982 begins engaging with the ideas surrounding graffiti, but he does so in a much less like, I'm going to write my name really big in this cool script on this moving image, and instead he appropriates public space in subway stations and makes what are referred to as subway drawings. And so he would be waiting for the train, he'd have some sort of pen, a white marker, and he would make these drawings very quickly. But they were not necessarily meant to be this proclamation that Keith Haring was standing in this space. And he's not seen as this kind of cultural badass, the way that other graffiti artists who were tagging things on trains wanted to be perceived. Instead, he wanted to put something in the public space in the same way that Holzer did, that presented a thought process. And what we have here is these two large hands removing the wings of an angel and therefore leaving a liberated man to roam the planet like these other wild animals in the shape of dogs or some other thing. And in the center we have these two kind of token Haring dancing figures. David Sally in 1983 painted this work, King Kong. Now, when you look, I'm giving you all of the media information down here. So this is oil and acrylic paint on a canvas, but that canvas also has a structural element to it, this protruding flat surface on which there is a wooden table and an electric light. And you can see the cord that runs down to a power outlet. This artwork does need to be plugged in. Yeah. I'm just going to skip ahead. Gorilla Girls. How many women had one-person exhibitions at NYC museums last year? Question mark. That's the title of the work. Gorilla Girls are still an active art collective in New York City. They recently gave a panel discussion somewhere, I can't remember where, but anyway, when you see the Gorilla Girls, you will always see them wearing gorilla masks. There's generally 4 of them when they make public presentations. Rarely is there just one. There's always at least 2, generally 4. Never really more than 5. And they're, from neck down, they're wearing normal clothes, t-shirt, jeans, suit jackets, skirts, whatever they want to wear. But over their faces, they have these gorilla masks because they want to be anonymous. And as this body of anonymous women, they make political statements in the form of advertising material. And so this work would have been, like Holzer, put in the public space. And so people would consider these ideas as they are engaging with their day-to-day life. You walk down in the same way you might see a Keith Haring while you're waiting for your train. You might be walking near the Guggenheim Museum in the Upper East Side of New York and see this poster and just think to yourself, wow, the Guggenheim hasn't given a one-woman show or a one-person show to a woman at all. Only the Museum of Modern Art has? Oh, that's weird. That's 1985. We are almost 30 years past this. These numbers have not changed that much. Nobody says painting criticism like Mark Tansey. Forward retreat. Forward retreat is obviously a play on words. If you're moving forward, you're not retreating. And so when I talked a little bit about this idea of artists seeing a destroyed art history and in that destruction they can mine it for whatever they want and appropriate freely, this is a painting of that idea. And so what we have in this landscape, this red landscape, are all of these objects that would appear or would have been in a large art viewing institution, say like the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. What is also imaged here are the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but they are rendered in such a way that they are seated backwards on their horses. The horses, like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, are flying into this landscape, and so in a certain to a certain extent, what Tansey is saying is, we might be moving forward, but maybe we're moving backward. Maybe it's the end. Maybe it's the beginning of something new. We don't really know. Here's an image of it for you to think about. Jeff Koons, Wabbit, 1986. I'm sorry. There's that information. I'm going to slide it up so you can see the whole sculpture. It's from 1986. And yeah. What this looks like is obvious to most of you, maybe all of you, but I'm just going to say it for what it is. It looks as though we are seeing a mylar balloon that is in the shape of a bunny or a rabbit. What you are actually looking at is a stainless steel sculpture that has been meticulously crafted by Koons and the fabricators that he has worked with since this time. He's worked with a lot of the same people for almost 30 years. They have meticulously given us this shape. And so you can see how just reflective it is by the way the rest of the gallery that you can see that it's situated in. When you see a Koons work in person, they are truly incredible to look at because they are flawless, and it is really, really, really impressive. I've had the luxury of hitting up or seeing his studio, hitting it up. I didn't hit it up. I went to it. So I have been through his studio and I've met the man very briefly, and it's insane. It's the biggest artist studio that I've ever been to in my life. There are a few larger ones in the world, but this one's one of the big ones. He's wildly famous and has made a name for himself by giving art viewers a sense of the naivete of or like when you're a kid and you get a balloon, you're so enamored with the shape of the balloon. It's shiny, it's reflective, it's big, it floats. There are all these things. I mean, I trust that almost all of you have seen a child interact with a balloon. So to kind of convey that same emotional reality to an older person, you have to give them some sort of a surprise or some sort of a trompe-l'oeil. And so here what Koons is trying to do is capture that essence of seeing something and being like so exuberantly amped about it, and but doing it in a way that is sustainable. This balloon is not going to deflate, and that, sustainable means it's going to live for a long time. Chaim Steinbach, in 1986, collected a variety of ready-made objects or commercially available objects, all of them various shades of red. He then constructed these specifically designed shelving units, also painted red, that these red objects would be placed on so that people could look at objects that you could buy but organized in a way that might not be familiar. And so instead of looking at a clock in a store because you need to buy a clock and you're trying to figure out which sleep alarm clock you're going to go for, instead Steinbach is saying, just look at these objects because there's one overarching thing that they have in common, and that's redness. Carol Dunham in 1987. I'm showing you the development of Dunham, so there's going to be another Dunham coming down the line. But here we have Carol Dunham making a series of paintings on wood panels that I love these paintings, and I love them so much, I really just want you to look at them. It's really simple to say, well, I see a butt, or I see some testicles, or I see some other weird, like, some of these things look like they're trachea or something. What Dunham is interested in doing, or what he's presenting here, is this idea that, like, when you doodle something, when you, like, just continue to write things down, there's this repetition of forms that come out of it, and he is building a painting out of those repetitions of form. He's playing a lot with depth of field, how far this thing recedes, where it recedes, where the paint lays on top of each other, and where it falls behind. And these are all concerns that came out of the paintings of Jackson Pollock. And if you read, which I hope you did, which you were supposed to, the Alan Caprow text, you'll understand that, that was a thing that people learned of Pollock, or learned a way that they learned to read and interpret his works. And so it's not surprising that 20 years down the line, artists are still engaging with this idea and putting it into their own terms. Christopher Wool makes paintings the way that Jasper Johns makes paintings. He wants them to appear kind of simple, quiet, devoid of content. That's kind of his MO. Excuse me. He paints a lot with black and white. In black and white, excuse me. Gerhard Richter. Here we have two parts of a series, the Baader-Meinhof series. The Baader-Meinhof was an anti-governmental commune or collective that existed in Germany in the years immediately preceding the creation of these paintings. Much like the Branch Davidians in the United States, some of you might remember what I'm talking about when I say that, but these like separatist groups that operate against the government are often read as threats to the government. And so the Baader-Meinhof group, they were actually like trying to be very rebellious. I don't know how successful they were in any of their endeavors, but they definitely were anti-establishment. Their building was raided. They were all arrested. This is a photograph of one of these members that was reproduced in a newspaper that was reporting on the fact that all of these people had actually been killed. So the police raided this place. They didn't really arrest anybody. I just said they did, but they didn't. It ended badly with all of the Baader-Meinhof people dying, with the exception of, I think, 2, maybe. And so what Richter did is he took these images directly out of a contemporary newspaper and turned them immediately into paintings. I'm not saying that Richter was siding with Baader-Meinhof. He didn't think that the German government should be torn down. He still lives in Germany. What he's saying is this is news, and this kind of news needs to and should find its way into art history. And so he made an entire series of paintings out of these images. Matthew Barney, he's a really interesting guy who's done a lot of really crazy work in the last few years, in the last decade really. But in 1988, while a student at Yale, he was working on a project called Drawing Restraint 2. It's enumerated, but it's kind of enumerated out of order. So this didn't necessarily follow drawing restraint 1. It's just referred to as Drawing Restraint 2. Again, a little jab at institutional structures. Barney was an athlete, is still an athlete. I mean, he's not like a professional athlete, but he was in college and high school. He played a lot of sports. And so he knew this idea that in athletics, in order to get stronger, you need to develop a system of resistance. And so as a graduate student at Yale University, he was interested in seeing how you could become a better artist or like what a better artist is. And so in order to understand what a better artist is, he's applying this structure or appropriating the lessons of exercise. And so he is physically making it more difficult for him to make drawings in an attempt to examine what it means to make a better drawing. Is it a better drawing if he's exhibiting a certain amount of restraint in its creation? Is he making himself a better artist in that? These are questions he's putting forth. So that dude who was imaged next to Cindy Sherman in Double Portrait, much like Sherry Levine, was interested in the way that we perceive information, and specifically advertising information. And so what Prince did was he started to look at all of these objects, specifically cigarette ads from the Marlboro Corporation, and what they were telling people about the thing that they were buying. Obviously, cigarettes don't say, these are going to cost you a lot of money, these are going to make you smell a particular way, these are going to make you have to stand outside when it's like 4 degrees so that you can get your fix. Health issues aside, there's lots of other things that these things actually do. But instead, what advertisers, specifically for Marlboro, were interested in was conveying the sense of the like macho-ness, the history of Americana, the American West. All of these things are compiled into these one images. And so what Prince is interested in is like, okay, I'm an artist. I think about the way that people interact with visual language, but man, these advertisers do the same thing. They just do it for a different end. So I wonder if I photograph what they're photographing, but remove any evidence of the advertising campaign, I'm actually going to allow people the ability to look at these things more critically. And so he did that. And he literally just took pictures of advertising and cropped the photo, or cropped it or framed it. It might have been before he clicked the button to remove any evidence that this is from an advertising campaign. But that said, it is really recognizable. He has gone, this is what he does, he appropriates things like this all the time, and he has been taken to court quite often for it, and they generally side with him. Grand Fury, we are entering the time period when we have the AIDS crisis, and so art groups actually began to develop as a way to combat the misinformation that was spreading around this crisis. There were people, there still are people that think that by handing somebody $1 bill, you might be able to give them HIV, or sharing a toilet seat might give you HIV. Basically, people were afraid. They were afraid for their lives. They didn't understand what this disease was. And so instead of actually talking about it, they just freaked out and marginalized people they thought might be infected, or communities that might be afflicted with this. In 1988, that was specifically the queer community, the gay male community, but very quickly that has changed, and now it is there are as many cases in other populations as there are in or new cases as there are in the gay male population. Just FYI, this isn't. It has never been a disease that was like specifically of gay people. So, what Grand Fury did, a collective of artists came together and they they paid for it straight out. They didn't steal this ad space, but they appropriated the methods of advertising campaigns and made an ad that is teaching people or instructing people on the realities of the AIDS epidemic. And so kissing doesn't kill, greed and indifference do. On the side of a bus in New York City. Yeah. David Wojnarowicz, Untitled, One Day This Kid Will, or Untitled, One Day This Kid. I want you to pause and read this whole thing, and just do that. Kiki Smith, can I get this in there? Head and 1990. Untitled. All right, I'm going to cut off a little bit of his head so you guys can get that information since it's necessary. Here we have two bodies presenting a rather grotesque understanding of the human form. Kiki Smith is a very interesting sculptor. I keep referring to sculptors as sculptures, and I'm sorry for doing that. I'm not going to talk that long about this work. I just want you to know her name. She's a very important person. She deals a lot with body and body politics. Here she is talking about the way that our bodies work functionally, and so you have all of these references to biological stuff that our bodies do. These forms bear marks that seem like bruises. You can see most clearly in this image that the female form seems to be or has evidence of lactation or producing milk. What you can't see are there are other biological fluids that appear to have come out of these people, like urine, tears, blood. So Kiki is really, she's presenting a sense of equality. It's like, look, we both genders have bodies, and those bodies have real functions, and those real functions are humanity. And so humanity is really the key thing that she's trying to present. FGT, everybody. Felix Gonzalez Torres. Felix, this is Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA. All of Felix Gonzalez Torres' works are untitled. He did himself give the parenthetical titles there too. This is a work of art that some of you might have encountered in a public art viewing institution. It gets a lot of play because it's a crowd pleaser. It also, in its crowd pleasing, is really, really poetic. I love Felix Gonzalez Torres. I think that his minimal approach is just like right up my alley, and if I had a lot of money, I'd buy one. This work is a set of rules. The rule for displaying this work is that at the beginning of the exhibition, a pile of candy measuring the weight of Gonzalez Torres's longtime partner and friend, Ross. It's the weight of Ross's body in Los Angeles when he died. And the idea is that you, as the viewer, are allowed to walk up and take a piece of candy and enjoy that piece of candy, and as the duration of the show or the exhibition that this is part of goes on, the pile gets smaller and smaller, as does the memory or the weight of Ross, like the terrestrial body, the visceral, the body of Ross diminishes. All of you actually walk around the space with this piece of candy in your mouth, and you remember the work of art, and therefore you, in kind of an allegorical way, you remember the memory of Ross. This has a lot of unpacking to do, and I'm actually not going to do it, so don't sweat this one. Janine Antoni, let me bring this up a little bit. Janine Antoni made a project about what it is like to be a woman, or the stuff of women, the kind of auxiliary cultural stuff of women. And so on the right hand side, what you can see in this tiny little shadow box is what looks to be the inside of a heart-shaped box of chocolates, and then obviously 3 tubes of red lipstick. In the larger image, you see 2 blocks sitting in a large white room, and in the back you can see glass cases. The glass cases in the back house the items, more of the items obviously, but the items that are in this small little shadow box on the right. The two large blocks in the large white space, however, are the material used to make the objects in the back room. That is not just a plastic case for chocolate, it's actually made of chocolate. And this large brown block that's nearer to you in this image is also chocolate. Those lines that are made in that thing, that block of chocolate, were made by Janine Antoni's mouth. Hence the title of the work, right? She gnawed at this large block of chocolate and got enough chocolate that she could make a lot of those little plastic things. The other block is lard, lard, and she did the same thing. She gnawed at it and then she turned it into lipstick. So what she's doing, in the same way as Meryl Lauderman Euclides from 2 weeks ago was doing, she's looking at the idea of work and the idea of womanhood. In 1992, Glenn Ligon, he, like Christopher Wool, paints pretty specifically or exclusively or deals exclusively in black and white. I don't always feel colored. I do not always feel colored. I do not always feel colored. I do not always feel colored. He repeats these over and over, and the method of repetition blurs it out as he continues to write. And the idea is that you say this thing once, and you mean it. And you say it over and over and over and over again. You still mean it, but the meaning is muddied by the repetition of it. The emphasis, the punch, it falls apart. And so he really kind of hit on a style and continues to make work that's pretty similar to this, but he's a very important artist these days. So. Excuse me, I always sneeze twice. Jenny Saville makes these very large, massive paintings. These things are probably like 8 feet tall, if not 12 feet tall, and as wide as they would need to be either of those dimensions. And they are often about the body, and the way that she paints the body is very, they're very tactile and very luscious paintings. The thing I love about this painting is the confrontational way that she deals with the fact that as a female, she has a larger form. And, not only are women not supposed to have larger forms, but they're certainly not supposed to present larger forms, certainly not naked, and certainly not from this vantage point, right? So what Saville's saying is like, actually, I'm just going to do it because this is my body, I'm comfortable with my body, and I'm going to point out to you how my body is shaped by making it seem as though my body is a topographical map. And so she makes all of these marks on her thighs and on her stomach to show that, this part of my stomach is a little lower than this part of my stomach. Tony Orsler, Don't Look at Me, from 1994. Orsler makes these projections that are kind of all about anxiety and social awkwardness, where he, as you can see here, there's this vague sense of costuming, and then this white pillow thing that has a face projected on it. You can obviously very clearly see the projector on the floor near it. And then toppled over is a piece of furniture. This is kind of where Orsler was at this time period. What you hear when you're in the gallery is a man's voice, generally Orsler's voice, saying something like, "Don't look at me! Don't look at me! Don't look at me!" really loud over and over and over again. And the fact that you need to kind of like get on the ground and peer under, because obviously you want to look at it, makes you aware of the work you're doing to see this object, and that much more aware of that notion. Lorna Simpson, Wigs, a Portfolio from 1994. Lorna Simpson is a female artist that is very interested in the way that people present certain parts of their body, and here she's interested in hair, specifically wigs. And so she has given us a variety of different kinds of wigs, mainly for people of color. That's why all of the wigs have generally the same color to them. They're all black hair, as it were, except for the one blonde wig. And there are these little funny things like the mustache and then the pubic hair also. This is about the kind of commodification of identity. You know, you as a woman of color in the United States, you have lots of options for how you can buy your blackness. I'm actually going to skip this one. I'm mad at Kara Walker right now. Jake and Dinos Chapman, Great Deeds Against the Dead, 1994. Wicked grotesque, right? What you have here are three mannequins, that are formed in such a way as to appear to be bodies that have been brutalized. This is actually a sculpture based on a print that Jake and Dinos Chapman have appropriated. This is that print. It's by a very, very famous printmaker, a Spanish printmaker named Francesco de Goya. Disasters of War is the name of the portfolio that it comes from, and Great Deeds Against the Dead is the name of this specific print, this image. This is one of the first artworks, this portfolio of Goya's, Disasters of War, was one of the first things to present the negative, the disgusting side of warfare in the early 19th century. So this was made in 1810. So oftentimes in more brutal warfare skirmishes, there is the presentation of the body of your foe as a way of saying to other potential foes, don't come in here, don't mess with us, whatever it is, do not. And so at a time when warfare is presented in very kind of clean news titles in mass media, Jake and Dinos Chapman were interested in bringing in this imagery and presenting it in this very aggressive way, but also in a very passive way, because you know these are not, when you see these in person, they're very plastic. They don't appear to be human forms. I mean, they appear, that's a dumb thing to say, because obviously they appear to be human forms, right? You don't think they're bodies. You don't walk into the room and think like, oh my God, I'm looking at a decapitated head. Like, it's obvious by the fakeness of the hair, the fakeness of the skin, the fakeness of the way the skin is painted, the fakeness of the presentation. I mean, it's on a platform in a white cube. Like, you get that it's a sculpture. There I go again, sculpture. Jake and Dinos Chapman are two brothers that have been working together for the last 20 years. So they like dealing with war, and they deal with it from a very political way, but in a way that actually gets people to look at it and confront these issues. Kind of in a poppy way, which is gross to say. Poppy war, that's disgusting. George Condo. For those of you hip-hop fans out there, Kanye West's album cover for My Beautiful Dark Fantasy, or My Twisted Dark Fantasy, or whatever that album is called, was painted by George Condo. This is a work he made in 1994, Memories of Rembrandt. Rembrandt is a painter that is way, way, way older than any of our coursework, so I haven't talked about him at all. He's a Dutch guy who made a lot of self-portraits, like dozens of self-portraits. Condo, Memories of Rembrandt, brings together all of this notion that one person creates so many self-portraits by saying, you know, what Condo's saying is my memory of Rembrandt, I'm speaking for George Condo, my memory of Rembrandt is a lot of self-portraits. So there's a lot of eyes, there's a lot of teeth, there's a lot of hair, there's a lot of paint. And that's what he's giving you. Here's another Dunham. So, you know, in the earlier work I talked about the like vagueness of biological forms. Well, as his work progresses, he just kind of goes whole hog and says, I'm going to deal with biological forms, anthropomorphic forms, forms that look like human bodies, and see how that changes the meaning of the work. I think in a way that is similar to a lot of other artists, he's presenting a sense of kind of cultural anxiety, or also a little bit of cultural antagonism. So, and then the last thing I want to talk about is the next step in art, Betaville by Angela Bullock. So in 1994, an orange bench was placed in a white gallery, an entirely white gallery, and in front of that bench were two horizontal bars and this box with this weird thing that was attached to that box. And then there's one vertical element that is actually, you can't really see it, but it's this thing, and it's this thing, and there's that connecting it. And you see all of this stuff if you're the first person in the room. You see this stuff and you're like, I don't get it. And so you kind of wander over and you sit down on the bench, and all of a sudden the little robot starts moving and starts making a drawing on the wall. And you stand up and the drawing stops. So in an extension of ideas that were first brought forth, I think, or like first kind of succinctly manifested in Robert Morris's Mirrored Cubes, the artwork needs the viewer to be present in order to actually work. And so by the end of this time period, artists have like fully kind of exploded the realm of possibility to such a degree that they begin to incorporate the viewership in the creation of the work. And on that, this excessively long lecture comes to an end, and that's that. See ya.